Most people plan their summers around one question: can we afford it? Can we afford the road trip? The groceries? The electric bill when the AC runs all day? Those are reasonable questions. But this summer, the math behind each of those questions has quietly changed, and most households won't realize it until they're already in the middle of it. This isn't about fear. It's about knowing what's actually in front of you before it arrives. Because right now, several pressure points that have nothing to do with each other are converging on the same 3 months. And the overlap is the part nobody's talking about. Let's go through it, piece by piece. You've already felt the first layer of this, whether you understood what it meant or not. Going into late February of this year, the national average price for a gallon of regular gasoline sat at $2.96. That was near a 5-year low. Gas had been trending downward. Forecasters were calling for a relatively comfortable driving season. Then the conflict in the Middle East erupted and the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point through which roughly a fifth of the world's daily oil supply travels, was effectively closed. By May 12, according to AAA data analyzed by LendingTree, the national average had climbed to $4.55. That's a 54% increase in under 3 months. California crossed $6 per gallon. 6 states surpassed $5. Oklahoma, the cheapest market in the country, was still above $3.90. Every single state in America posted a double-digit percentage increase compared to the same date in 2025. Now here's the part that matters most. Some forecasters, assuming the Strait situation eventually stabilizes, are projecting averages could approach $5.73 for summer peak driving months if the conflict continues at its current pace. That figure comes from modeling published by Finder using current trajectory data. Even the more optimistic scenarios assume prices remain well above where they started, because the damage to global supply expectations has already been priced into crude markets, and those expectations don't reset overnight when tensions ease. For a family driving the national average of around 15,000 miles per year, the gap between where prices were in late February and where they sit today translates into real dollars removed from other decisions: groceries, medical care, school supplies, utilities. That money doesn't disappear. It just stops being available for everything else. Here's something that surprises most Americans when they hear it. Natural gas generates approximately 40% of U.S. electricity, the single largest share of any source. So when a conflict disrupts global gas markets, your power bill doesn't exist in a separate lane. It's directly connected. The mechanics are straightforward. When global demand for liquefied natural gas surges due to disrupted supply, American gas producers earn more exporting than they do selling domestically. Market forces naturally pull more supply toward export terminals. The result is upward pressure on domestic gas prices, and since gas drives such a significant share of electricity generation, the cost flows directly to ratepayers. This was already a concern before the current conflict. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration's 2026 Summer Energy Outlook, cooling degree days are projected to run above the 10-year average across most of the country, with the heaviest concentration in regions where grid capacity is already under strain. That means higher demand precisely when supply is most constrained. NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, the official body that regulators and grid operators rely on for reliability assessments, released its 2026 Summer Reliability Assessment this month. The overall picture is mixed. The good news: the grid has added over 58 gigawatts of new capacity since summer 2025, including significant solar and battery storage. Most regions can handle normal peak conditions. The harder news: 3 subregions are flagged as facing elevated risk of supply shortfalls under above normal or extreme conditions: NPCC New England, MRO Saskatchewan, and WECC Northwest. And NERC's Director of Reliability Assessment was clear in his language: improved conditions shouldn't be read as declining overall risk. The vulnerabilities have shifted toward extreme weather scenarios. When a sustained heat event blankets an entire region at once, the transfer system that moves surplus power from cooler areas to hot ones stops working at the exact moment it's needed most. Texas provides the clearest historical illustration of what that looks like in practice. During the February 2021 winter storm, the state came within minutes of a cascading total grid failure. Not rolling blackouts, a complete failure that engineers later said could have required weeks to restore. The infrastructure is the same infrastructure. The vulnerability to extreme conditions hasn't disappeared, it's just dressed in different seasonal clothing. On top of grid stress, the average American household was already paying significantly more for electricity than they were a few years ago. Rising rates, deferred infrastructure maintenance, tariffs on grid materials, and increased capital costs for transmission upgrades have all moved in the same direction. When this summer's demand and supply pressures are added to a baseline that was already elevated, the bill arriving in August is going to look different from the one that arrived in August 2024. Gas prices hit your wallet today. Grocery prices work on a slower clock. And that's exactly why this part of the story gets so little attention. By the time most people connect rising food costs to decisions that were made months earlier, the window to do anything about it has already closed. Here's what economists are actually saying right now, on the record. Chris Barrett, a professor of agricultural economics at Cornell University, told Newsweek directly, the impacts of the major fertilizer supply disruption haven't yet hit. His projection for food price inflation by the end of 2026 is around 11% on a year-over-year basis. That figure isn't alarmist framing, it's an academic economist's current best estimate, made publicly in a named interview. Economists at Purdue University echoed the concern, telling Newsweek that pre-conflict forces were already exerting meaningful upward pressure on food prices before the first shot was fired. They were careful to note the price shock extends beyond just fertilizer costs. Fuel prices for farm equipment, supply chain logistics, and labor pressures are all compounding simultaneously. The USDA Economic Research Service, publishing in May 2026, projected grocery price inflation at 3.2% for the year, already above the 20-year historical average of 2.6%. But their own reporting acknowledged that higher fuel and fertilizer costs tied to the Strait disruption pushed at-home food prices up 0.7% in April alone. A food economist at the USDA noted he expects food price inflation to tick above 4% or 4.5% for the full year, notably higher than 2024's 1.2% grocery increase, and approaching the 5% increase seen in 2023. The timing matters here. Fertilizer costs affect planting decisions made in spring. Reduced applications or substitutions made this spring won't show up as lower yields until late summer harvests. And lower yields won't show up as higher shelf prices until fall and winter. A ceasefire signed today wouldn't undo fertilizer decisions made in April. It wouldn't restore crops that were planted under different economics. The food supply chain has a memory, and that memory runs 12 to 18 months. One additional note from Fortune's reporting in April, a drought running concurrently with all of this is affecting crop production in multiple regions. A drought, a conflict, rising input costs, and supply chain disruption don't operate independently, they interact. Lower yields mean less corn for livestock feed. Less corn for livestock feed means more expensive meat and dairy. More expensive meat and dairy show up in every food category downstream. There's a date on the calendar that almost never appears in economic coverage of inflation, household budgets, or supply chain disruption. June 1st. When the school year ends in early June, approximately 30 million American children who rely on free or reduced-price school meals through the academic year lose access to those meals. That is not a small number. The USDA's Summer Food Service program was designed to fill that gap, but historically it reaches only about 1 in 7 eligible children, leaving the vast majority in households that must cover that nutrition cost themselves, often in the same weeks when grocery prices, gas prices, and utility bills are all moving higher. At the same time, the average cost of summer childcare in the United States now exceeds $1,000 per month per child, according to Child Care Aware of America. For a household with 2 school-age children, that's $2,000 a month in expenses that simply didn't exist in May. That addition lands on top of everything else. This isn't a theoretical squeeze. It's a concrete calendar event with a concrete dollar cost, arriving precisely when every other household pressure is also peaking. The families who are going to feel this first and most acutely are the ones who were already running closest to the margin before any of it started. Airlines don't publicize this, but jet fuel has more than doubled since the conflict began. In Singapore, one of the world's primary aviation fuel hubs, prices are up over 100%. Airlines respond to sustained fuel cost increases the same way every time. Fares rise, fuel surcharge fees expand, bag fees escalate, route economics get restructured. Delta's CEO acknowledged publicly that both consumer and corporate travel spending had started to soften. Southwest revised its quarterly forecast downward. These aren't forecasts, they're executives describing what's already happening in their booking data. For a family of 4 who locked in airline tickets 3 or 4 months ago at pre-conflict prices, the trip they budgeted no longer matches the trip they're about to take. The hotel rate has moved. The rental car carries new fees. The gas to drive to the airport costs more. The meals at the destination cost more. Every component of a trip that was priced at one set of assumptions is now being experienced at another. Millions of families are running this math right now, comparing what they planned against what it actually costs, and a significant number are concluding that losing a non-refundable deposit is cheaper than going. When enough families make that call, it flows directly into the economies of destination communities, the hotels, restaurants, local shops, and rental companies that depend on summer tourism to make their year. Here's the part that's hardest to communicate clearly, because it's not about any single number. It's about what happens when all of these pressures occupy the same months at the same time. When gas costs more, money that was going somewhere else gets redirected. The car repair that was marginal becomes skipped. The dental appointment that could wait gets pushed. The home maintenance that seemed non-urgent gets deferred. None of those are savings. Their debts moved to a later date, typically with interest. The car not serviced in June fails in October. The appointment skipped in July becomes an emergency room visit in November. The home not weatherized this summer makes next winter's heating bill worse. The compounding doesn't show up in any single household's budget right now. It shows up in aggregate, in fall and winter, as a wave of deferred problems arriving on the other side of summer. Cornell's Barrett put the timeline plainly. Even if the conflict resolved today, the effects would continue building over the course of the fall and winter. A senior economist at EY quoted by CBS News made the same observation in different words. The disruptions, she said, will outlast the fighting itself. That's not pessimism. That's just how supply chains work. They have lag. The disruption lands now. The bill arrives later. Knowing that distinction matters, because it means the window for getting ahead of it is right now, before the lag catches up. Let's put the honest picture in one place. Gas prices are currently up over 50% from where they were in late February, according to AAA data. The national average as of late May 2026 stands around $4.46 per gallon. Forecasts for peak summer pricing range from elevated to significantly higher depending on how the Strait situation develops. Grocery price inflation is running above the historical average and accelerating. The USDA projects 3.2% for the year, but April's single-month grocery increase of 0.7% is already running faster than annual projections would suggest. Academic economists are publicly projecting 4 to 11% year-over-year depending on how long supply disruptions persist and how drought conditions develop. The grid is better prepared than it was a year ago in terms of total capacity, but NERC's own 2026 assessment is explicit that extreme heat events remain the primary threat to reliability. And extreme heat events are exactly what the EIA is projecting for this summer, above the 10-year average across most of the country. Child care and child nutrition costs land in June, simultaneously with peak utility demand, peak fuel costs, and the beginning of hurricane season. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index fell in May to 48.2 out of 100. That number represents how American households collectively feel about their financial situation and the economic outlook. It's not a forecast, it's a current reading of real people, right now, before the summer costs have fully materialized.